technology, infrastructure, climate risk, and resilience. He has over 3 decades of global experience across East Asia, South Asia, Europe, and Central Asia. I would also like to invite Mr. Subhomay Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor, Business Standard. Mr. Bhattacharjee has 22 years of experience in journalism. His areas of interest include public policy, especially regulatory issues, finance, and urban development. His latest book, titled India's Coal Story, traces how India's coal reserves was at the center of a major political scandal. I would also like to invite Mr. Pramod Singh, Senior Director, Research, AEEE. Thank you for being here. We look forward to an insightful discussion.
So we are good to go. This is a session which, as Debs just said, is a fireside chat, which means Abhash, you essentially speak and we all listen. That's the idea. And considering where you come in from, the World Bank's Climate Action Group and everything that's got to do with the fact that there's so many and so interesting sort of stuff that's been happening there, which you are privy to, and I just don't mean anything happening in India, but also at the global perspective, which I'll come to shortly. Pramod, I'm very happy to have you around, and you can give us the perspective which we would need, especially the regulatory perspective. We assume that you know, qua the regulator, what's happening and what are the challenges for the regulatory for the sector. My job is the easiest one, and I essentially sort of nod in agreement with whatever you've said and assume that that knowledge is mine. What I'll do now is, something which I'd always wished to ask is that it's something that we all now are approaching. Energy as the fundamental currency of the 21st century. The earlier centuries had the currency, as in the fiat currencies, the hard currencies, the dollar, the pound. Before that, it was the gold itself. In 21st century, I suspect the currency that is the most significant is the energy. The energy stock that you have, the energy that you're able to use, the energy that is any nation can bring to use to in its dealing with the rest of the world. So given that perspective, and given that this is the and that role of that currency is going to expand so significantly, Abhash, which way do you think the energy balance in this world is as of now? Because before we get into energy efficiency, how is the energy structure in this planet right now? Is it in a place where calls for equitable distribution and then quota energy efficiency and others can come in? So, yeah.
So, first of all, thank you, Subhomay. And it's so good to see you. I was reminiscing that we both first met when I was a young rookie IAS officer in the Department of Economic Affairs, and Subhomay was a young journalist at that time. And I also want to thank AEEE, and Satish and I go back more than 40 years. We were in the same school together. And of course, at that time, both of us used to have hair, but now it's... But on a more serious note, I think the question you ask is a very good one and a very important one, which is that now we are entering a world where unlimited and virtually free energy is a possibility. And that is a different paradigm altogether. Because if you start thinking that if you did a thought experiment and you entered a world where energy was essentially free. That would be a very different world from what we live in today, because there are so many things that you could do that you cannot do today. So it opens up enormous possibilities. Now, when we talk about energy transition and just transition, the word transition kind of implies a seamless, kind of painless approach, But as we are seeing, if you just look at the geopolitics of energy over the past 2 years, it is anything but painless, We are going through a transition, and it will be in phases where, some parts will be, less painful than the others. But if you look at, for example, Europe, Europe has now, because of the war in Ukraine, has pretty much cut its dependency on Russian oil. And that is something that maybe 2 years ago would have been unthinkable. I mean, the whole politics of Germany, a lot of it was, kind of shaped by this and based on this. So maybe to answer your question, I would say that yes, we are seeing a transition. The transition will not be smooth and continuous, but rather it will be jerky and there will be disruptions. But I don't have any doubt that we are entering a new phase in which there will be plentiful energy, much of it will be clean, and it will be cheap. And again, as I said, this opens up tremendous possibilities. Just to give you one example, heat. I think, I don't remember the exact number, but I would say about 30 to 40% of the world's energy consumption is on heat, production of heat in some form, either for industry or for, home heating and so on. Or, well, we haven't cracked that one yet. But now, if energy were to be free, as I said, then, for example, green steel or zero emission steel or zero emission cement becomes a possibility. And especially in these hard to abate sectors, I think especially we need to think about how we can electrify as much as we can. The whole mantra is that electrify everything and make that electricity clean. So I think those are the two thoughts I would leave you with on the question.
Well, that's interesting, and I'll just come down to those particular things, to make it clean and to make it cheap. I'll just meanwhile take a couple. My first ideas with Pramod is that we are now at the beginning of the summer season, and true enough, very soon we'll be hearing reports of parts of India going above 50 degrees, which makes it uninhabitable. And I expect that governments, like all governments, would start responding, would start saying that they are concerned. There'll be, news items which will not be so which will not be so so encouraging. In that context, what do you think, Pramod, that what are the short-term measures that immediately the government could sort of, in some of the states, could start taking? And I think energy is a state-level issue more than a central government-level issue. So what are the things that some of the states could start taking? And considering that we are speaking in the umbrella of energy efficiency, what are the package of measures that you think should or could be taken? The panel before us talked about a lot of things that needs to be.
Thank you, Shubhamoy. Last year, our peak demand, if you look at the all India level, it crossed 230 gigawatt. And this year, if the projections stay, correct, it's likely to cross to 40 gigawatt. And of that peak demand, the contribution from cooling, and if you look at one segment, let's say residential segment alone, it was more than 50%. So we know where the problem is. Now coming to the solution, what can be done in the short term? Of course, we know that the entities like the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, they have been promoting standards and labeling scheme, and it's one of the most successful schemes in India. Last year itself, if we look at the latest impact assessment report that came out from Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and Venkat alluded to that in his opening speech. Just from the energy efficiency schemes of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we saved 300 billion units of electricity. And of that 300 billion units, the maximum contribution came from the standards and labeling scheme, which was more than 50%. To put those numbers into perspective, last year India added roughly 10 gigawatt of solar, and if we convert the 300 billion units into equivalent solar capacity that can generate so many electricity, it's 200 gigawatt of solar. So that's the unsung hero. Sometimes it doesn't come to the forefront. So in the short term, if I will say, there are perhaps three things one can do. Continue to promote use of higher star level appliances. Within the standards and labeling program, there are different bands. It starts from single star, it goes all the way to the 5-star level. And every year we know when the summer season arrives, the month of March and April, that's the time when majority of the AC sales starts happening. Can government start promoting and nudging customers so that instead of purchasing a new appliance which is of a lower star category, start purchasing appliances and ACs particularly which are of a higher star? How it can be done? Now, of course, the suggestions are easier made, but we have already seen a recent example of Prime Minister Surya Dhan program. It's an innovative way to start shifting revenue subsidies to capital subsidies. You are putting up in a infrastructure, putting up solar plants, and then everyone will get the free electricity. Something similar can be thought of, that why don't, instead of giving 100 units, 200 units free electricity, start incentivizing purchasing higher efficiency appliances. Point number one. Point number two, we also know that purchasing an efficient appliance alone is not going to solve the problem. We have to also operate it efficiently. And we have been saying that, looking at the conditions here, the way adaptive thermal comfort works, air conditioners, even if it operates at 26 degree, 27 degree, and if we complement it with ceiling fans, it provides the necessary level of thermal comfort. Start encouraging people to run their ACs at a slightly higher temperature. With every 1 degree temperature increase, air conditioner will save 6 or 7% electricity. So it's the right time to start talking about those campaigns. The mission life, it talks about people's participation in a resource efficient future. This is the right time to do that campaign. The third point will be, while we traditionally, the way power sector and energy sector has worked, we always try to satisfy the demand. We feel that demand is given, static, and let us work around how to meet the demand, how to plan our supply, how to plan our generation accordingly. What if the demand can also be made flexible? So just by shifting, and it depends on the demand pattern of every state, but somehow if we try and make the demand a little bit flexible, instead of time X, if we are able to shift it to some other time, and I think for 15 minutes, let's say if we turn off the AC in this room or increase the set point temperature from 24 degree to 25 degree, people are not going to feel that much of discomfort. So how do we make the demand flexible? Using technology, using behavior change, and that will help address this problem in the short term. Thanks.
That's interesting. Do we switch off the AC for the next 15 minutes? I think I'll shorten our time frame very strongly. So I'm not sure whether we should be thinking of such drastic ideas. But it's an interesting thing you said about using star appliances, and that brings me again to what Abash was saying about the cheap energy that is possible. Star appliances, high star appliances is by definition, at least as of now, costly. So how do you equate that with cheaper energy? I mean, where is the? I would think that that's probably one of the biggest challenges that's going on.
So this is not a unique problem, which is that you need an upfront investment to go to a higher efficiency, and it's not a very difficult problem to solve. So for example, in New York State, they have this what they call PACE bonds, which are energy efficiency bonds, and it's essentially the utility issues these bonds, and it's paid off by the energy savings from the consumer. So essentially, you're putting on bill, and like Prabodh said, you're sort of instead of capitalizing, you're making it part of your revenue stream. So you could think of schemes like that, innovative structuring that will reduce or even make zero the upfront extra cost of buying a 5-star. So that is one thing. The other thing is also the tax incentives. So right now, a 3-star or a 1-star is taxed at the same rate as a 5-star, and that does not make any sense. So if I had a wish list, I would say that 5 stars should be taxed at the lowest possible tax bracket. But the other thing I would add to this is that the AC efficiency standards of India itself is not state of the art. So if you look around the world, right now China actually has the best and the most, I would say, ambitious energy efficiency star ratings. So we should aspire to that. If not surpass it, we should try to at least match China's standards for air conditioning. That is something that we should definitely keep in mind. So I don't know whether I answered your question.
Brings you deliciously close to what I was thinking. And this is something, if Mr. Anil Jain had been here, I would have asked him. Energy pricing depends, I mean, that's what you're looking at. Let me just give a bit of a background and then I'll put that question. In India, coal, 85% of it, oil almost entirely, gas. These are all, their prices are technically free, but the prices have not changed. Oil is still selling at the bunk, the retail price is being kept fixed. Ditto for gas pricing, the price that comes from the local prices, from the discovered fields. What I'm saying is that if energy pricing stays non-market based, then what can be the extent to which signals at the retail level of Star and others, for AC we are talking about, could be for anything else, how much of a chance of success do they have of making people feel that's worth taking on?
I think the market is already telling you that. So if you look at the cost of capital, in fact, Goldman Sachs had done a recent study. They found that the cost of capital for a fossil fuel project is around 12-13%, and the cost of capital for a solar project is 3%. So the market itself is telling you that, and the reason for that is that markets don't. There's no morality to markets in a sense. It just follows the logic of what is profitable and what is not. And it is clear that today, without any subsidies, solar is the cheapest form of electricity. Now the challenge is that the intermittency problem, right? So what we need to make is that solar plus storage should become cheaper than coal or natural gas. I think it's already cheaper than coal, but natural gas still it's not, or maybe it's near parity. But the moment we can get solar and storage at a lower level than fossil fuel alternatives, I think it is just going to take off. So I would say, to answer your question, I think the market forces will take care of it.
And that's where I want to ask you, if for instance a political executive decides that the prices of some fuel will be kept fixed, and that is also because the constituency demands it, is that a better way to go about it? Or to what extent can they relax those pricing constraints and create subsidies from the renewables, from efficiency and others? I mean, how difficult is that transition? has it played out well? In Africa, for instance, I recently saw that many of the solar projects have been taken off. Once the World Bank scaling solar was the project, once the World Bank support went off. So what are the chances of success in India?
So I'm an economist, so I'll try and answer as an economist with the luxury that, you know, I'm an armchair economist. I don't have to deal with, you know, the difficult issues that politicians have to deal with. So as an economist, I do not like distortions in pricing. So I feel that prices should be allowed to reflect supply and demand. And if you want to protect the poor, there are better ways of doing it. And in fact, India has such a great advantage in having this, what they call the India stack, and the direct transfer of benefits. So you can really shield the poor by direct transfer of benefits and let pricing work as the market dictates. That is an efficient system in my view, and it is being tried, right, in India, in many forms. So I think that is a better way of doing it, but not yet in the energy sector. I hope that, you know, we eventually move to a completely market-based system, and you protect the poor by this direct transfer of benefits. That, in my view, would be the optimal solution. But again, as I said, I have the luxury of sitting here and not, you know, having to deal with the difficult issues that, you know, the policymakers have to deal with. But that would be my answer.
That allows me to ask you that if, as Abbas said, pricing distortions were removed from the pricing of, say, fossil fuels, and there's a huge amount of distortion there or available, it's getting to be more and more stiff. In that, would that itself solve the problem of bringing in energy efficient apparatus? Would that be the golden manna, or does that need still for some further work to make energy efficient products become something which the market would want to buy, the consumers would want to buy?
Definitely, pricing will be, I think, the most important driver. If customers are feeling the heat, if I may say so, given the yeah, of electricity bills, then of course a lot of solutions that we see, including, you know, efficient appliances, that will start making, you know, clear business sense. So definitely pricing will be important, but what's also important in case of energy efficiency, that it should not be looked at as an afterthought. Many a times we think about developing something and then we feel, okay, it's not being built in the right manner. For energy efficiency, what we say, the more early you plan for it, the greater rewards you are going to reap. And if we can, you know, take examples of some of the developments happening in India. For example, when we talk about affordable housing, it's not only that the initial cost of the housing has to be affordable. If it has to be affordable in a true sense, then people living in those houses should also be able to cover for the expenses that are required to, you know, run the houses, including electricity bill. So it's very important that you bring in innovation to develop something which in true sense it's sustainable and affordable. So a lot of schemes going forward, if we start integrating energy efficiency from the very day, then even though, you know, the real pricing or actual pricing is not there, still it will lead to a lot of gains on the efficiency front.
So just to add to this point, I want to give you one piece of evidence that somebody told me just this morning. And I haven't had time to verify it, so maybe Shubham, you might also step in if you feel that this is not correct. But somebody told me this morning that North Bihar, the DISCOM, they introduced smart metering. And as a result, it's one of the few DISCOMs in the entire country that is in a surplus today as a result of smart metering. Now, I come from Bihar, so I can tell you that's quite remarkable, right? Poorest state in India doing something like this. But it is, as like I was saying, it's a, you know, letting prices operate, you know, in a dynamic manner leads to a DISCOM going into surplus. That's a pretty remarkable achievement if it is true. I haven't had time to verify that.
One of the things that we found from one correspondent is that people got a shock in the sense that the first time there was a meter. So there was that possibility. So it's a, I mean, there wasn't any meter going around at all. But Abash, you're not just looking at India, you're the climate action person for the entire South Asia. Now, our neighbors, uh, countries like Bangladesh, for instance, has introduced very impressive changes at a quality level and scale in lots of sectors. Are there any things that we can learn or is being tried out in these countries which can then be scaled up in a country like India, say Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or others?
So I have to clarify that I don't work on the energy sector. I work on climate change broadly, but mainly focused on adaptation. And I do want to say that I have said in many forums that one of the most underreported development stories in the entire world is the remarkable reduction in the number of deaths from cyclones in both India and in Bangladesh. It is a fantastic job, and those of us old enough to remember, many of you will remember the 1999 super cyclone in Odisha. I believe it was more than 50,000 people died in that. Today, if the same cyclone happens, it will barely, the death, of course, every death is a tragedy, but we barely hit double digits with the same intensity of cyclone. And that is because India and Bangladesh have invested tremendous amounts in early warning systems, in multi-purpose cyclone shelters, and so on and so forth, all across the coast. And I'm very proud to say that the World Bank has been a partner in this program in both countries. So that is a remarkable achievement. And since you asked, what are our neighbors doing well, I think Bangladesh has done, this is a tremendous achievement that needs to be recognized. The amount of investment that they've done in cyclone early warning systems and preparedness. But that said, for both countries, I think the next stage is that while we have done a great job in reducing the number of deaths from cyclones, we have not done such a great job in protecting livelihoods. So that's the next generation of investments that are needed in how do you protect the livelihoods of the poor. And that, again, involves not just concrete investments, but also things like insurance schemes, social protection for the poor, etc.
That gives me a very good chance to ask you, and you're both very careful about it, but I'll still encourage, but I'll still feel like asking you. The cyclones, the death tolls was what triggered the political executive to move in. Do you think heat tolls can do the same thing for energy efficiency?
I think that's a very interesting proposition. And the honest answer is I don't know. But I will say one thing, which is that I do not think that policymakers anywhere in the world, I don't want to single out India, I think anywhere in the world, I don't think we are fully ready or cognizant of the scale of the challenge that we are going to face on heat. So if you were following the news last year, there's a place in Pakistan called Jacobabad, and it hit 53 degrees centigrade last summer, the highest ever recorded temperature, and that was in South Asia. And we are going to see similar temperature ranges across the subcontinent, across the Indo-Gangetic plain. Now, India has done some really pioneering work on heat. So, for example, Ahmedabad was the first city, I believe, in the world to develop a heat action plan. But if you look at the action plans, they are very reactive. They're more like a disaster response kind of. There's nothing preventive or sort of trying to alleviate the problem before it happens. And that is where we would like to work with the government of India and with all the governments across South Asia to kind of help think more proactively on to address this problem. And I have to say, because this is an energy forum, you cannot air condition your way out of this problem. Because although India is going to be probably the fastest growing air conditioner market in the world, the International Energy Agency has estimated that in the next 30 years, every 10 seconds an air conditioner is going to be sold in India. So it's a huge market. But that said, even despite all that, air conditioning is not going to solve the problem. We need a ensemble of very different methods to deal with this issue of heat. And that has to involve building materials and better building to deal with heat. I was in Kerala a couple of weeks ago, and we were sitting in a Panchayat Bhavan. And outside the temperature was quite okay, it was normal. Inside it was like an oven, it was baking inside the temperature. So we still haven't sort of figured out how to do buildings that deal with heat. And in fact, I'm meeting the Secretary Rural Development on Friday. And one of the things we want to work with the government of India on is the housing programs. Because you have this PMAY, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which literally builds millions of housing, both urban and rural. Now, these programs have been totally focused on volume. But now we need to start thinking about the quality of life within these buildings. And frankly, the development in technology, for example, these sensors, you can put a $1 sensor inside these houses, which will tell you the temperature, the ambient, and you can relate to some central where you start measuring it. So we need to start thinking about the quality of life of people living in affordable housing, and I think that's sort of the next stage of dealing with heat.
Do you think, I mean, Abash neatly suggested the issue. Would a heat toll galvanize action? Then open it up to the audience.
I think yes. We have already seen how governments have started taking action. I grew up in Odisha, and although the entire India world is feeling 50-degree plus, today, when I was in my school days, we used to have 48-degree, 58-degree at that time. And the kind of actions government used to take then was schools will be shut down, there will be some rosters, office hours will get shifted. That was one way to respond to that challenge. Now, it's like we are in true sense we are like living in a comic story. We all are protagonists. We're trying to address one problem. There is another problem which is getting generated. So the solution will be, how do we start thinking bigger? How do we expand the the boundary of our problem? So we can't be just looking at energy efficiency, and as Abbas said, can't air condition our way out of from this problem. So we'll have to bring the resilience aspect, and that's where we think that increasingly going forward, the death tolls linked to extreme heat events, that will start getting more and more addressed in future government policies.
If I to ask you, district administrations in India are always overburdened with competing claims. Supposing there's a heat toll, what is the one thing that you'll advise the district magistrates to do, like in cyclone, taking them to cyclone shelters? Is there any such demonstrable sort of thing which can be done for them?
So yes, there are things that can be done, and in fact, the heat action plans do cover some of these things. So you need cooling shelters where people can shelter in place, which could have air conditioning, or it has other ways of cooling down. So where, for example, if you're a poor laborer, you can go and shelter there. In fact, in the US, that's quite common. In summer, you have places where people can, and those are typically air conditioned. So you can think of sort of these short-term alleviating measures, but I don't think that is a fix at all. In fact, one thing I wanted to stress is that if we want to deal with heat in a sustainable manner, we have to rethink the way cities are designed and built in India. And one of the very important things is green spaces. So there is good empirical evidence to show that if a neighborhood has greenery and trees, the temperature will be about 5 to 6 degrees cooler. And that is a simple, quick, cost-efficient fix. So I live in Singapore. So in Singapore, they have a target that every citizen of Singapore will be 10 minutes walk away from a green public space. Now, of course, you will say that Singapore is like smaller than probably Noida or something, like one neighborhood of India. So maybe it's not comparable, but why can't we think of this like that every city in India, like we have this target that every city of 5 million or above will have a metro. I think every city in India should have this target of that every citizen deserves a green public space where they can go within 10 minutes of walking. I don't think it's such a difficult thing to do, but it just requires a mind shift.
And then I want to add a point. You mentioned about the death toll. In energy efficiency, we say you cannot control what you cannot measure, right? So similar thing. I think the first important step would be to also start tracking how these extreme heat events are causing death. We start getting into that problem, and the data start coming to the surface. Definitely, there will be a pressure build up to start taking more control.
Sorry, one more thing you said, because you asked about district administration. Another very good innovation could be social protection for the poor. Because one of the things that will happen is that if you're a poor laborer and it's 50 degrees out, you cannot go and work. You'll probably die from the heat. So you could think of, again, direct benefit transfer, where you could have a parametric insurance kind of thing, where if the temperature is above X degrees, automatically your account will be credited with 1, 2 days, 3 days of wages. And empirically this has been found. It's called anticipatory cash transfers. Empirically across the world, this has been found to have a really great impact on poverty, because it protects the poor preemptively rather than doing it ex post facto.
That's a very interesting point of line. I mean, that's something that we would like to do it. Pramod, don't worry about the numbers. If those come out from the newspapers, you can be assured that we'll be going all over the place talking about those. But at this stage, I thought that from Abhash and Pramod, it's an interesting thing if, and I'm hogging all the questions. So, any questions from the audience? I have quite a few, but I'd have to allow you to open this to a general discussion. So yeah, make it short and please, if you have a mic, so I suppose that will be very useful.
The only thing standing between you and lunch, so I guess.
Yeah, that's always things. But like all good things, should we ask the leader of the house to start on any? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Vishal Garg. I have a question to all of you. So you mentioned, Abbas, you mentioned about green spaces and they helping reduce the city temperature. What are your thoughts on other measures like cool pavements and cool roofs? How effective they have been in different parts of the world in reducing the temperature?
Absolutely, I should have said that in my. So when I said green spaces, I meant all of that. Cool pavements, and in fact, even the concept of sponge cities. As you may have heard, where the pavements are made permeable so that you're capturing the water. That also has a good impact on temperatures as well. So all of these things will be needed. And as I said, we need to just rethink the way we design and build cities in a completely different manner. In fact, there's some interesting research out of the US where they're using nano technology in paints. So you mentioned white roofs or cool roofs, where you can cover the roofs with this special technology, which will reflect out the heat. So these are all very interesting innovations that are underway.
Hi, Satish Kumar, AEEE. So Abhash, I think a question for you. We all, I think, are discussing about cooling. What do you think is going to be the most important lever in terms of like addressing some of the cooling and thermal comfort related challenges in an era of climate change? I think a lot of people believe that it is financing and investment, but we also see that I think policy is playing an important role, or technology is going to play an important role. So I think from a World Bank perspective and as a lead sort of like for that climate change program, what are your thoughts? And if you can just share, I think, some of your perspectives, I think with this audience, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So thanks, Satish. So again, putting my economist hat on, I think that it's all about incentives, and you need to fix the incentives. So in terms of the policy levers, I would say finance is definitely part of it, because this upfront cost is really a big barrier of going to the most efficient ways. So there are ways of fixing that, like we talked about, like for example differential taxation could be one way of addressing that. There are innovative structures that I mentioned, like the PACE bonds, where you can really minimize or make zero that extra cost. So those, I think you definitely need to fix that. The other thing I think is that you really want, and that is our aim, that we are working with DPIIT, we want to make India a global manufacturing hub for these super efficient cooling devices, whether air conditioning or ceiling fans. For that, you need not just that you bring in the state-of-the-art technology, but you need to keep that technology current, because every year or so, there'll be new stuff going on. So how do you fix that innovation ecosystem within India, so that we are not just dependent on importing technology, but We are creating that technology here. That again, I think needs an ecosystem approach of fixing that innovation system. And a lot of interesting things happening in India, for example, startups, the solar decathlon, everyone talks about that. You could have a similar model for cooling so that you're getting startups to start investing in that. So that would be the second, third. And the third is competition, because as we were talking before this session, as I said, every 10 seconds, one air conditioner is being sold. The air conditioning manufacturers are doing fine. They don't really need to innovate. They could produce, it's like the old Ambassador car, no? It was a really rotten car, but it still sold because there was no competition. So we really need to open up to the best state-of-the-art technology that it comes in so that they can compete. So I think those would be my thoughts.
We'll take our last question.
Hello. I am V.K. Kaushik, having experience over almost 40 years in the power sector on the distribution side mostly. So I was just wondering, and for everybody this question is that while we are talking about the ACs and we are going to add many more ACs every year, we are just removing the heat from one room and leaving it just in our environment. The next room gets automatically heated up. Our Angan is getting heated up. The entire environment is getting heating up. So everybody else who is your neighbor would have to add the ACs in their room. So this is such a typical problem that we are just removing heat from one corner and just leaving it to the others to bear, and just introducing others to the AC need and all. So how to solve the question of sinking the heat that we are dissipating into the environment, apart from the trees and all that we are talking about, but this heat should be sunk somewhere. Thank you.
I'll just say, sir, one word. There is another solution that is being discussed. India is looking at it. It's called district cooling system. That's another way. How do you centralize your cooling equipment, and it addresses the heat island problem which individual ACs create. So it's like having a big large cooling plant in one location that can run on green electricity, and it will provide chilled water to different customers, whether it's residential or commercial. Singapore is one of the countries which is pioneer on this, and India is also now increasingly looking towards it.
So I completely agree on district cooling with Pramod. So actually, if you look at the Gulf, for example, places like Dubai, they have much more district cooling than India does. And the reason for that is that the guidelines are such that any commercial development more than 1 million square feet requires that you do a screening for district cooling. So in a way, they're kind of incentivizing district cooling. And as Pramod mentioned, it's 30 to 40% more efficient. So that is one solution for sure. But again, I will go back to my earlier point that I think your point is a correct one, that in air conditioning, you're just moving the heat from one place to another. We really need to rethink the way we build and design cities. So I think green spaces, more water bodies in the city, these are known to reduce the ambient temperature by 4 to 5 degrees, reducing the amount of concrete, because concrete is a heat absorbent, and that's what causes the heat island effect. Less tarmac, the black tarmac is a heat absorbent. So, we need to rethink the whole way we think about cities, and that would be the solution.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I learned a lot from both Avash and Pramod, and I think I'll switch off come to the formal part of this session at the end of it, but not before offering them a generous round of applause. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would now request Mr. Pramod Singh to please present the speakers with a token of appreciation. Thank you so much for that discussion. We will now break for lunch. I request everybody to be back in 45 minutes. So 2:40, please let's try to be back in the room for our next session. Thank you.